My name is Matt. I'm 32 years old, living in Chicago. I've been married to Claire for just over 6 years, and I'll be honest, it hasn't always been smooth sailing. But up until now, I thought we were in a good place. We had our bumps, sure, but we also had our moments. So when she started talking about a bachelorette weekend in Miami with her friends, I didn't think much of it. But something felt off. I don't know how to explain it, but I noticed it the second she started packing. It wasn't anything big, just a sense of distance, like the warmth had been replaced by a chill in the air. Miami, huh? You planning on hiring any strippers while you're down there? I said, trying to joke my way through the unease. She was bent over the suitcase, zipping it up, but I could tell she was tense even before she responded. She didn't laugh. In fact, her eyes darted up to mine for just a second, and I saw something flicker across her face. Something I couldn't place, but I didn't ask. It was such a tiny thing. She was probably just stressed, right? It was a big trip, a lot of people involved. She cleared her throat. No, nothing like that. Just some fun with the girls. I nodded, but a knot started to form in my stomach. Claire was always so quick to laugh off a joke, even if it wasn't the funniest. But this was different. There was a hesitation I hadn't seen before. I spent the next couple of hours convincing myself it was nothing. Just her pre-trip jitters. She'd been looking forward to this weekend for weeks. I even helped her load her things into the car when it was time for her to leave. "Have fun, babe," I said, trying to sound more casual than I felt. She kissed me on the cheek, told me to behave myself, and then she was off. I spent the evening cleaning up around the house, just going about my usual routine. The night was quiet, too quiet. And that's when I found it. While cleaning out the closet to reorganize some things, I noticed a shopping bag tucked away behind some old boxes. I didn't think much of it at first. Claire was always buying little things here and there. But when I opened it, my heart sank. Inside was an expensive bracelet, way more expensive than anything she would have bought for herself, especially considering the trip she had just left for. But that wasn't what made me freeze. It was the note that came with the bracelet. It wasn't from a store. It was handwritten. The note said, "Can't wait to see you again." D double quote. Who the hell was D? I stood there for a moment, staring at the note, my mind racing. There had to be some innocent explanation. Maybe a work gift? Claire was always getting things from clients, but this didn't feel like that. The writing, the intimacy of the words, it didn't add up. I didn't know what to do. Confront her? But she was just leaving for a weekend with friends, and it could be nothing. Maybe some random D was just a friend she hadn't mentioned. I couldn't draw conclusions yet, not without asking. So I shoved the note and bracelet back into the bag and went about my evening, though my mind was buzzing. Something had shifted in the air, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was just the beginning. I went to bed that night, not sleeping, but instead staring at the ceiling, wondering what the hell was going on. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't like Claire to avoid something so small, so I decided to casually bring it up over breakfast, hoping to gauge her reaction. She was sitting across from me at the table, sipping her coffee as she scrolled through her phone, absorbed in something I couldn't see. Her hair was still a little damp from the shower, and her eyes were tired, but she looked calm, perhaps a bit too calm. "Hey," I began, taking a bite of my toast, trying to sound casual. "I found that shopping bag yesterday. The one with the bracelet." Claire froze for a second, not enough for me to think anything was wrong, but enough for the tension in the air to thicken. Her eyes met mine, and for the briefest moment, I saw something flicker across her face. Guilt? It was hard to tell, but there was something. She set her coffee cup down gently, a practiced, smooth motion. "Oh, that," she said, the words coming out too quickly, too easily. "It was a mix-up. A client of mine sent it to me by mistake. He thought it was for someone else. I've already returned it." I nodded slowly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that her explanation was just a little too perfect. The way she said it, with such calm precision, like she had rehearsed it, as if she had known I would ask. "A client, huh?" I said, keeping my voice neutral, but I couldn't stop myself from probing. "And this D guy, he just mixed up the gift with your name on it?" Claire smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Yeah, it happens. No big deal." I didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at her. The knot in my stomach grew tighter. She wasn't the best at lying, at least not to me. But this felt rehearsed, too smooth. "Okay," I said, wiping my mouth with a napkin and leaning back in my chair. Well, I just didn't expect to find something like that, you know? She nodded, her smile stretching just a little too wide now. I know, it's a silly mix-up, but you know how things get, right? I gave her a small smile in return, though my thoughts were far from calm. She had brushed off the question with such practiced ease that it made my head spin. The kind of calm that said, I've done this before. Something wasn't right, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized how easily she was lying to me. But I didn't confront her, not yet. We finished breakfast in silence, and I watched as Claire moved through the motions of the morning. She didn't look at me much, her eyes mostly on her phone, her movements quick and efficient. I tried to push the nagging feeling in the back of my mind away, but the truth was that I couldn't stop thinking about it. She was lying to me. I didn't know how or why, but the doubt was there, growing like a weed in the pit of my stomach. I went through my day with a hollow feeling in my chest, the words Claire had said spinning over and over in my mind. A mix-up with a client. I kept replaying it, trying to convince myself that it was just a misunderstanding. But something told me that wasn't the case. By the time Claire returned that evening, the tension between us had thickened. She was still the same. She smiled, kissed me hello, talked about her day. But I couldn't stop watching her, listening for the lies in her words. I kept asking myself, how long could she keep up the act? As the night wore on, I found myself growing colder, quieter. She was right there in front of me, but we felt farther apart than ever. I didn't confront her about the bracelet. I didn't say anything more. I just watched, waiting for the moment when everything would unravel. And deep down, I knew that it would. Claire returned from her weekend trip on Sunday evening. She was radiant, almost too radiant. Her cheeks had a glow to them that didn't seem to match the short, 3-day getaway she had described. She was supposed to be coming back from a weekend with friends in Miami. A few drinks, some beach time, maybe a little shopping. Nothing that warranted this new energy about her. When she walked through the door, I was sitting on the couch, my mind still racing from everything that had happened over the last couple of days. But I tried to greet her with a smile, not wanting her to sense the tension that had been building between us. "Hey you," I said, getting up from the couch and walking toward her. "How was the trip?" Claire smiled, setting her bag down. She looked a little tired, but she still had that sparkle in her eyes, something I hadn't seen in a while. "It was great, just what I needed. The girls and I had a blast." She paused for a moment, running a hand through her hair. "I wish you could have come, though. It would have been fun having you there." I could tell it was a half-hearted remark. The energy around her felt like a facade. "Yeah, sounds like you guys had a lot of fun," I said, my voice more flat than I intended. I saw the pictures. A lot of sun, a lot of laughs. I wasn't sure if I was fishing for something or if I was just acknowledging how different she seemed, how something about her tone felt off compared to the story she'd told me leading up to the trip. She sat down on the couch, pulling her legs up beneath her. "Yeah, just a few drinks, a little sightseeing. It was nice to unwind." I looked at her for a moment. There was something in her eyes, a slight edge of discomfort, like she was holding back. I wanted to ask more, but I didn't. I couldn't. Part of me was still processing the fact that I had found the bracelet and the note from Dee. Part of me still couldn't bring myself to confront her fully. Instead, I let the silence stretch between us for a moment. "What did you do after the beach day?" I asked, trying to keep things casual, pretending that everything was normal when it was anything but. Claire shifted slightly, her posture straightening, as if she was suddenly aware of the weight of the conversation. "We, went out for dinner one night. Nothing too fancy. Just some local place near the hotel. Then we went out dancing. Nothing wild, though," she added with a nervous laugh. I felt my chest tighten. There was no mention of any specific details about the trip, nothing that felt personal or real. Everything about her response felt rehearsed, like she had practiced it in the cab on the way home. "You seem happy," I said, trying to read her. "Did you get to relax at all?" "Yeah, definitely," she said quickly, her tone almost too eager. "It was a good time." I paused, watching her carefully. Her smile was a little too wide, her words a little too smooth. Something was off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. "Well, I'm glad you had fun," I said, even though a knot was growing tighter in my stomach. She nodded. "I really did. It was just what I needed, you know?" Her answer was far too vague for my liking, and I could tell she was doing her best to keep things light. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't getting the full story. It was like I was talking to someone I didn't fully recognize anymore, Later, as we sat down to dinner, I kept replaying the pieces of our conversation in my head. The way her eyes had darted away when I mentioned the trip, the way she had glossed over certain details. It didn't feel right. It didn't add up. And then there was the bracelet, the note from D. I couldn't stop thinking about it. My mind kept returning to the question, who was D? When she got up to clear the dishes, I picked up my phone, trying to stay calm. I opened her Instagram to look at the photos she had posted from the trip. She was tagged in several pictures with her friends, all laughing, all looking like they were having the time of their lives. But then I saw something that made my heart stop. There was a reflection in the window of one of the photos, barely noticeable, but clear enough for me to recognize the setting. It was a house that looked too familiar. It was a house we had stayed in together years ago, on a weekend getaway. I remembered it because it had been one of the few weekends I could afford to take her on a trip. I scrolled through the other pictures, more reflections, more angles that only seemed to suggest that the hotel she had mentioned was actually the same house, the one she'd never mentioned being at. The truth hit me like a cold wave. She wasn't just lying about the details. She was hiding something much bigger. And with every picture, with every lie, I felt the distance between us grow further. She wasn't just lying about the trip, she was lying about us. I put the phone down, watching her as she moved around the kitchen, humming to herself, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. It was becoming clearer now. I didn't need to confront her yet. I just needed to watch. And so, I did. I didn't say a word. I didn't push her. I just let the evidence of her betrayal build quietly in my mind, step by step, picture by picture. The distance between us had grown. It was growing every day. And I knew, without a doubt, that I wasn't the only one who noticed. But for now, I stayed quiet. I kept pretending everything was fine, because one day, when the time came, I would confront her. And when I did, there would be no turning back. It was only a few weeks after Claire's Miami trip, and she had already planned another one. A quick work trip, she said. This time, I noticed something different. She was unusually vague about the destination, and the client she mentioned was someone I had never heard of before. Claire was always open about her work. It was a big part of our conversations. But this time, she clammed up. Another client? I asked casually as I stirred my coffee one morning. She paused for just a second too long before answering, as though she was making sure her words lined up. Yeah, it's this new guy, Jeff. He runs a marketing firm. We're just doing some strategic planning and brainstorming for his upcoming campaign. I nodded, pretending to buy the story, but something felt off. There was no real excitement in her voice this time, no urgency, and definitely no enthusiasm. She was saying all the right things, but it felt rehearsed. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something, and as the day went on, I found myself obsessing over it. I hadn't confronted her yet, but the seed of doubt had been planted deep, and I could feel it growing. Later, as she packed her things, I couldn't help but glance at her phone. She'd left it on the counter, the screen lighting up briefly with a message notification. It was from D. I almost didn't think anything of it at first. After all, D could have been a client, maybe someone she worked with before. But then I remembered the note from the bracelet, the one that had been so intimate. Can't wait to see you again. D. It was starting to feel like pieces of a puzzle were fitting together, and not in a way I was comfortable with. Claire left for her trip in the afternoon, just as she had for her last one. She kissed me goodbye, the usual routine, but this time it felt colder. It was subtle, but it was there. I watched her car pull out of the driveway, the knot in my stomach tightening. As the evening wore on, I couldn't stop thinking about the trip, her vague description, the odd message, the same sense of unease that had been there when I first found the bracelet. So, while she was still away, I did something I hadn't done before. I started digging. I opened her email account. We had always been open about passwords, no secrets between us, or so I thought. She didn't seem to mind when I checked her inbox for work emails. It wasn't something I ever questioned, but now I was looking for something. It didn't take long. A few clicks and there it was, a string of emails between Claire and a man named Jeff. They were discussing the details of the upcoming work trip. The emails weren't exactly flirtatious, but there was something about them that felt too familiar, too comfortable. I scrolled down further, my stomach sinking with each new message, and then I saw it, the hotel she had booked for this work trip. It wasn't the same type of hotel she had usually stayed at for business, the kind with conference rooms and meeting spaces. This one was listed as a boutique hotel in a quiet part of the city, somewhere more intimate. I looked at the name of the place again. It was the same area Claire had stayed in when she went to Miami, the same neighborhood, the same type of boutique hotel. Her story wasn't adding up. She'd said the trip was for work, that it was a new client, but now, looking at the emails and the hotel location, I felt like I was seeing through the cracks in her lies. My suspicions were deepening, but I didn't know how to approach it without coming off as paranoid or confrontational. That night, I tried to call her. I wanted to ask about the trip, ask about Jeff, ask about the hotel, but she didn't answer. I wasn't sure if she was too busy or if she was deliberately avoiding me. It wasn't until the next morning that she returned my call. "Hey babe, how's everything going?" she asked, sounding as cheery as always. "Oh, just working. How's the trip? Are you and Jeff getting everything sorted out?" I tried to keep my tone light, but I couldn't ignore the weight of the question. "Oh yeah," she said, sounding almost too enthusiastic. "It's been good, busy but productive. We're just wrapping up everything today, and I'll be back home soon." I let her talk for a few more minutes, nodding along, but I was too focused on the information I had uncovered. The hotel, the email exchange, it didn't fit. Her story didn't fit. "I'll see you soon," she added before hanging up, her voice light and breezy, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed, and as I sat there, staring at my phone, I knew I was no longer just questioning her. I was beginning to understand that there was more to this trip, more to the stories she'd been telling me, and more to her behavior than she was letting on. I didn't confront her, not yet, but I couldn't ignore what I had found. I couldn't stop the feeling that I was losing her, that I was losing everything I thought I knew about us. The facade of normalcy was cracking, and all I could do was watch it happen. As I went about my day, I felt more distant from Claire than ever. The mounting evidence, the growing distance between us, it was all sinking in. She was hiding something, and I was determined to find out what. Claire came back from her trip late on Thursday evening, looking just as radiant as she had before, but there was something about her energy that felt almost too practiced, too polished. I noticed it immediately, the way she smiled as she walked through the door, the way she held herself, as though she were trying to project an image of ease that didn't quite match the tension I felt between us. She dropped her suitcase by the door and rushed over to me. "I missed you," she said, brushing a quick kiss on my cheek. But her lips lingered for only a second before she pulled away. An unnecessary haste to the motion. I nodded, but I couldn't help myself from scanning her closely. I hadn't confronted her about the trip, not yet, but everything in me screamed that something was wrong. Her behavior, the way she spoke of it when we talked before she left, it was all slipping through the cracks, and I was starting to see the gaps more clearly. "So, how was the trip?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Got everything settled with the client?" Claire's eyes sparkled as she began to recount the details of the weekend, but there was an unnatural enthusiasm in her voice. It sounded too rehearsed, like she was sticking to a script she had worked on during her flight back. I watched her carefully, taking in the inconsistencies, the things she didn't say as much as the things she did. "It was great, really productive," she said, her voice smooth. "We stayed at that hotel I mentioned. Lots of brainstorming, but, we got a lot done." She paused, glancing away as though to avoid my gaze for too long. It didn't escape me. I kept my tone even. "What hotel was that again? The one you mentioned before?" Claire hesitated, just for a beat. Just a regular business place. Nothing fancy?" She laughed a little too quickly, almost nervously. Not like Miami, where we had all that fun." I let that hang in the air, trying to gauge her. Miami, where she had been so vague about the details. But now she was mentioning hotels and business trips in a way that seemed strained. I leaned in slightly, my voice lowering. "You said you were just doing a little work, but were you staying somewhere else too?" The moment hung between us. Claire froze, her lips parted for just a second before she composed herself. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," I said softly. I saw some of the photos you posted, and there was something about the background, I don't know. It didn't quite match up with the story you told me." Her eyes widened for a moment, then quickly narrowed as if she were coming up with a response. "Oh, right," she said with a forced smile. "I forgot to mention we took a few shots in different spots. Some were from the hotel, some from a little cafe nearby. Just the ambiance." She waved her hand, like it was trivial, something to brush off. But I didn't buy it. I stood there, silently watching her, and the distance between us began to feel palpable. She was getting better at hiding things, better at pretending, but I could see through it. I could see the lies, buried under her rehearsed calm, and it was becoming harder to ignore. The next few days passed with an unsettling quietness. Claire became even more distant than usual. She had always been busy with work, but now there was a new tension. Her phone was on airplane mode more often, and she started staying out later, coming home with vague excuses that didn't match the details she gave me before. "I had a late meeting," she'd say when I'd ask why she was so late. "I just needed some time to go over a few things." But there was always something she wouldn't tell me, always something just out of reach. She no longer seemed to want to share anything with me. She avoided looking at me in the eyes for too long, her touch becoming infrequent. When we were together, it felt as though I was sitting next to a stranger, and it wasn't the work or the distance that kept us apart. It was the space she had created between us. But I stayed quiet. I knew better than to push her when she was being evasive, especially when I wasn't yet certain of what was going on. Instead, I watched, I observed, I paid attention to the little things. I saw how she would glance at her phone and quickly swipe away notifications when I walked into the room. How she would smile too easily and change the subject when I asked specific questions. I didn't confront her, not yet, but everything she did, the way she dodged questions, the way she acted like she didn't care about anything anymore, told me everything I needed to know. I was losing her. She was slipping away, and the closer I looked, the more I saw. It came through unexpectedly, as these things often do. A simple notification from the security system I had installed at my wife's sister's cabin, a relic of a time when I thought our marriage was solid, our trust unbreakable. It had been years since I had checked it. Why would I? But today, for some reason, I felt the need to log in. The moment I saw the footage, everything became crystal clear. Claire's image appeared on the screen, stepping out of the cabin, a familiar man beside her. His hand brushed against her back as she laughed, and in that instant, I felt the crushing weight of certainty settle over me. It was him. I recognized him instantly, Jeff, the supposed client she had been working with on the last trip. The man she had mentioned but had never spoken of in detail. The one who, at least in her version of things, was just some strategic partner. But the footage didn't lie. She wasn't working. She was with him. They moved to the porch, still laughing, the intimacy between them palpable even through the grainy video. She leaned into him, letting her head rest against his shoulder. It was subtle, but it was enough. I sat there in silence, watching the video replay over and over. The sound of her laughter seemed distant, as if coming from somewhere far away. My mind was numb, my heart hollowing out with each passing second. As the footage continued, my thoughts circled back to every small inconsistency, every half-truth Claire had told me, the vague explanations about work trips, the sudden distance between us. All of it was leading here, to this moment. The moment I saw my wife with another man, and it was no longer a theory or suspicion. It was the truth. I didn't move, not at first. I couldn't. Part of me wanted to confront her immediately, to burst into the house and demand answers. But the other part, the part that had been preparing for this moment for what felt like weeks, knew that there was no point in rushing. I had already seen what I needed to see. I already knew what this meant. This was over. I took a long breath, leaning back in my chair, closing my eyes as the weight of it settled into my chest. The life I thought I knew, the life I had worked so hard to build with Claire, it was all a lie. For a moment, I thought about what would happen next. I had been mentally preparing for something like this, but actually seeing it, knowing it was true, felt like a punch to the gut. The facade of normalcy was shattered now. There was no going back. I wasn't sure when I'd reached this point, but I had. I had already detached emotionally, somewhere along the way, without even realizing it. I could still hear Claire in the background, laughing in the video, as I closed my laptop. I didn't have to watch anymore. I was done. The next few days were a blur. Claire came home as usual, full of stories about the trip, about Jeff, about work, about everything that felt more and more like a performance. But I was no longer listening. The real story had already unfolded, and it wasn't the one she'd been telling me. It wasn't the one she had been living. As I went through the motions of pretending everything was normal, I began to make plans for the inevitable. I didn't know when, but I knew I would confront her soon. I had to. I couldn't keep living this lie, not anymore. It was a matter of when, not if. But for now, I kept up the act. I helped with the groceries, I made dinner. I even laughed at her jokes. And every time she touched me or kissed me or looked at me with that same practiced smile, I felt the distance between us widen, the space between us growing colder. She didn't know I knew, but soon she would. And when the truth came out, there would be no going back for either of us. The weight of what was coming settled heavily on my shoulders, but I didn't feel angry, not yet. I felt nothing, only the quiet certainty that the time for pretending was almost over. And when it was, I would be ready. It had been a few days since I saw the footage of Claire with Jeff, her and that man, sharing an intimacy that I had never been given in the last few months, maybe even longer. The evidence was undeniable, but I didn't need more proof. I had already seen enough. I had spent these past few days waiting for her to confess, waiting for her to slip, to give me an opening. But she didn't. She played her part, carrying on like nothing had changed. She smiled, kissed me, made small talk about work, as if everything was fine, and I let her. I had already mentally checked out. The confrontation had to happen. I couldn't let this linger any longer, but I didn't want a scene. I didn't want anger, accusations, or drama. What was the point? I had the truth, and that was enough. It was over. So I waited for her to come home that night. The house felt different now. The walls seemed to close in around me. I was no longer the man who had been waiting for her to come back from her trips. I was the man who was about to lose everything. When she stepped through the door, I was sitting at the kitchen table, my fingers tracing the edge of my coffee mug. She greeted me as usual, with a smile and a kiss on the cheek. But there was no warmth in her touch anymore. It was a formality. She knew what was coming. "Hey," she said, a little too brightly. "How was your day?" I didn't answer immediately. I just watched her. I could feel the air between us shift. I'd known this was coming for weeks, but now that the moment was here, it felt surreal. "I saw the footage," I said quietly. My voice was calm, controlled. She froze. For a fraction of a second, her face shifted. I saw the tiniest hint of panic in her eyes, before it was masked with that practiced smile. But I didn't need to see more. I already knew. "Matt," she started, but I cut her off before she could say anything more. "You don't need to explain," I said, my voice steady. "I saw everything. I know what's been going on." She stood there, her eyes darting around, searching for something to say. But there was nothing. Her lips trembled slightly, but she didn't speak. "It's over, Claire," I said, my words landing between us like a quiet finality. "There's no point in pretending anymore." She took a deep breath, then exhaled slowly, like she was trying to find the right words, the right excuse. But I wasn't waiting for excuses. "I know," she said finally, her voice strangely calm, almost resigned. "I know this isn't easy." I looked at her then, the woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted for so many years. And yet now, in this moment, she felt so far away. She wasn't the woman I married anymore. She wasn't the person who had shared everything with me. "Claire, stop," I said, holding up my hand. "I'm not angry. I'm not looking for some kind of closure or apology. I'm just done." There was a long silence. She stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, the air between us as heavy as it had ever been. The quiet stretched on, and in that moment, I realized how far we had drifted. She looked at me, her gaze steady now, not avoiding mine like she had been. "I never meant for it to happen this way," she said softly. "It's complicated." I almost laughed, but there was no humor left in me. "It's always complicated, isn't it? That's the problem. You were never just honest with me, Claire." Her eyes softened, but there was no apology, no regret in her voice. "It wasn't about you. It was about everything. It wasn't that I didn't love you. It was that I was unhappy, and I didn't know how to fix it." I felt a cold weight in my chest, something I hadn't expected. "You could have talked to me," I said quietly. "You could have been honest, but you chose to hide it, and now everything is different. It's over." She nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving mine. There was no anger in her expression, no defensiveness. Just a quiet acceptance. "I know." I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me then. It was final. She knew it. I knew it. There was no going back. Without another word, Claire turned and began to walk toward the door. But as she reached for the handle, she paused, glancing back over her shoulder at me. "I'm sorry it ended this way," she said softly. And with that, she left. I didn't follow her. I didn't try to stop her. I sat there, in the silence of our home, knowing that this was the end of everything we had built, the end of the lies, the end of us. It wasn't what I had expected. There was no yelling, no bitter argument. It was just quiet. A quiet that stretched between us, a quiet that was now permanent. The weight of finality hung heavy in the air. I could feel it settle around me, a quiet certainty that things were never going to be the same. And as the door clicked shut behind her, I knew that this was my life now. Alone, but free. The days after Claire left felt different than I had imagined. I thought there would be some great moment of clarity, of anger, or even relief. But instead, there was a strange quiet. The house felt emptier, yes, but more than that, it felt like an open space, a blank canvas that I could now start to fill with something else, something better, something that wasn't bound by the remnants of our past. The first thing I did was remove her things, slowly, deliberately. It was the small actions that helped me feel like I was moving on, even if it didn't seem like much. The things that had been hers for so long were now just reminders of the life I no longer wanted. I started with the little things, the framed photos on the mantle of us at family gatherings, or the picture of our wedding day that sat next to the TV. I didn't throw them away at first. Instead, I packed them up in boxes, tucked away out of sight, and stored them in the closet. It felt like an intentional cutting of ties, a final step toward reclaiming my own space. Then I moved to the bigger things, the shared accounts we had for bills and the subscriptions that we had once enjoyed together. It took time, but I slowly began to delete accounts, cancel subscriptions, and change passwords. It wasn't out of spite, it was out of necessity. The act of severing those ties helped me understand that I wasn't just reclaiming my space physically, I was reclaiming myself. I even rearranged the furniture. I never would have thought something like that would have such a strong emotional effect, but moving the couch to a different spot, changing where the lamp stood, it felt symbolic, like I was changing the way I viewed my world. I didn't need to be tied to what had been. I was creating something new, even if it was just in the way I looked at the room. There was no rush to move forward. I didn't feel the need for dramatic gestures or a clean break, no big speech or last words. Instead, I focused on the quiet moments, the small victories. Waking up in the morning without the nagging weight of doubt hanging over me, feeling the lightness in the air where the tension used to be. It was all small progress, but it felt like healing. A few weeks passed, and I found myself at a mutual friends event. It wasn't something I had been looking forward to, but I knew I needed to make the effort. As soon as I walked in, I spotted Claire across the room. Her presence hit me like a wave, but this time, I wasn't overwhelmed. I felt nothing but a calm detachment. She looked up and saw me. Our eyes met for a brief second, and I could see her hesitate, unsure of how to approach me, but she didn't need to. She walked over, smiled that practiced smile, the one she used to greet everyone, and we exchanged pleasantries. The kind of pleasantries that strangers exchange, casual, polite, devoid of any real connection. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said, her voice softer now, as if testing the waters. "Yeah, me neither," I replied, feeling the awkwardness in the air. "I thought I'd make an appearance." We stood there for a moment, in the middle of the crowded room, and there was a strange feeling between us. There was no more anger, no more bitterness. It was just emptiness. The weight of everything that had happened between us hung silently in the air, but I didn't feel the need to address it. There was no need to dig into the past. The truth was already known. "You look good," she said after a pause, her eyes scanning me as if trying to figure out where I was emotionally. But she didn't know anymore. She didn't know me. "Thanks," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "You too." And then, almost like it was a natural conclusion, I handed her a small piece of paper. It was a photo. The photo I had kept hidden for so long, one I had taken a week before, of her and Jeff. The two of them together, smiling in a moment of intimacy that she never knew I'd witnessed. The look on her face was one of surprise, and it was clear in her eyes that she hadn't expected to be handed this evidence of her own betrayal. "I thought you might want this," I said calmly. She glanced at the photo, and for the briefest second, I saw her mask slip. Her eyes widened slightly, and then, just as quickly, she composed herself. "I don't need it," she said quietly, but I could see it, the subtle crack in her facade. I nodded. "I figured you might say that. It's just, I thought you should have it." "For closure?" She stood still for a moment, the photo still in her hand. There was no apology, no regret, just the acknowledgement of a shared reality that neither of us could deny anymore. "Well," she said finally, her voice barely audible over the noise of the crowd, "I guess that's it then." I didn't argue. I didn't say anything more. There was no point. I had already said all I needed to say. I had already let go of the past, and there was no reason to cling to it anymore. She nodded slowly, a ghost of a smile appearing on her face. "Take care, Matt." "You too," I replied, and with that, we parted ways. She walked off into the crowd, and I watched her go, feeling nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just nothing. And for the first time in a long time, I felt peace. Real peace. The kind that comes when you no longer need closure, when you've let go of what wasn't meant to be. The past was behind me, and for the first time in a long time, I was free. The nights had become quieter, softer, since Claire had left. It wasn't the kind of silence that felt empty, though. There was no echo of regrets or questions bouncing off the walls anymore. It was a different kind of quiet, a kind I had never known before. A peace that came with the acceptance that the past was done. I found myself walking alone that night, the weight of the last few weeks settling into my bones. I didn't have any destination in mind. I didn't need one. I just needed to move, to feel my feet on the ground, to let the steady rhythm of my steps drown out the faint remnants of everything that had been. I hadn't reached out to Claire since that night we had talked, that quiet confrontation that had made everything so final. There was no need to. The words had already been said. There was nothing left to unpack. I didn't even want closure anymore. I'd spent too many nights craving answers, wanting to know why she had betrayed me, why it had all turned out this way. But the more I thought about it, the less important those questions became. What did it matter? I couldn't change any of it. The truth had already shown itself, and that was enough. I breathed in the crisp night air, feeling it fill my lungs, the coolness of it wrapping around me, reminding me that life was still moving, still going on, no matter how much I had wished it would stop for a moment. No more waiting, no more clinging to things that were already gone. I was free of all the uncertainty, the second-guessing, the endless chasing of a version of her that no longer existed. It was funny how life had a way of teaching you to let go, how the answers didn't always come from a direct confrontation or some dramatic closure. They came when you finally stopped trying to force them. They came when you accepted the silence. I hadn't seen Claire in weeks. At that event with our mutual friends, I'd seen her for the last time, and I knew that too. There was nothing left to say between us. The last exchange had been so simple. Brief pleasantries, a few words that felt like they belonged to strangers rather than two people who had once shared a life. I hadn't expected to feel anything when I handed her that photo, the one of her with Jeff, taken on that trip she had lied about. But in the end, it wasn't about the picture, not really. It was about how easy it had been to let go, to pass it to her and let her keep it. The way she reacted too, no anger, no fight, just that brief cold acknowledgement between us. That was the final piece I realized. No more resentment, no more need to hold on to the past. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. We were both free in our own ways, and I didn't need to drag anything with me anymore. The walk through the streets felt different now. I wasn't walking away from something anymore. I was just walking. I thought about the house, about the empty space where Claire's things had once been. The changes I had made, small ones like rearranging the furniture and clearing out old accounts, had been more than just acts of cleaning. They were acts of reclaiming my space, reclaiming myself. I wasn't angry with Claire anymore, not really. The anger had burned away weeks ago. It had been replaced with this strange, almost peaceful understanding. She had her reasons, or maybe she didn't. It didn't matter. What mattered was that I had the rest of my life to live, and I wasn't going to spend it looking back. I stopped walking, standing on a quiet corner, looking up at the night sky. The stars were brighter than they had been in a while, and I felt small, but not in a bad way. Just a reminder that I was a part of something much larger than myself, that I had been carrying this weight, this history, and I had finally let it go. I closed my eyes for a moment, the cool night air brushing against my face, and I felt a calm settle into me. The turmoil, the emotional wreckage of the past years, it was all gone. I wasn't defined by it anymore. I was just me. The silence felt comforting now. It was no longer something to fear. It was mine, and it was my freedom. When I opened my eyes again, I knew without a doubt that I was done with the past. I had let it all go, finally. And for the first time in years, I felt the weight lift. I took one last look at the city, the hum of life around me, and I smiled. There was no more running, no more searching for closure, just quiet. And in that quiet, I found my peace. And it was enough.